the co-founder and CEO of Stathletes, which is a huge endeavor in and of itself, but I've always found you very interesting because you wear so many hats. So obviously you work in data, you're an entrepreneur, you have a corporate background, but not everybody who lives in that world also has their own segment on TSN, is on ESPN panels, is an influencer. So I'm curious as to how you identify professionally.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I don't think I identify as one thing professionally, and I think that's sort of nice because I can ebb and flow through certain worlds and take the best out of that world and leave some of like the politics and like the unfun stuff and just like take good energy. So for me, I think of myself as a tech entrepreneur, but I certainly, you know, when I'm in a room with hockey people, I feel like I'm as much on the hockey ops side as I am on tech. So I think it's like embracing whatever world you're in at that moment. So, you know, when I'm on TSN, I'm like, okay, now I'm a media person. I have to like think and act like that. When I'm having business discussions, now I'm, you know, in a room, I'm pitching. There's a certain cadence, there's expectations. And it all comes with just like being a lot more exposure. So saying, you know, some of the panels before, saying yes to things you wouldn't, being a bit uncomfortable, learning what works, what doesn't work. This year, I even was like, you know what, I should get a broadcast coach. Like, I'm doing enough. I feel comfortable, but like, how do you get to the next level? And being just honest with yourself of like, hey, I might just either not be enough or not have enough time. So how do I expedite that? And being humble to be like, we're lifelong learners. Everyone has certain strengths and weaknesses, and no one is good at one job. It always changes. So asking for help when I needed to kind of allowed me to be in all sorts of segments that are both fun, exciting, interesting, sometimes scary, but, you know, good feedback.
I mean, I don't know if you can tell by the look on my face, but I'm kind of scared by your answer, only because I find in sports in particular, people can sniff out the people who don't know what they're talking about.
Sure.
Like, it's super easy when someone says all the right things, but like then you take it one step further and then they're not dancing with you anymore. So how much of that has come with experience, and what experience came first and which ones did you put on after?
Well, I think in tech and business, like, you have to be so good at what you're doing. I mean, I went to university for 8 or 9 years. I still actually have a position as a data scientist in residence at the University of Toronto. I'm constantly reading. I'm constantly trying to keep up on things. I also don't bullshit people. Like, if I don't know, I literally am like, I didn't watch the Leafs game last night. I'm sorry. Like, not going to talk about it on national TV. So knowing where to draw those lines in the sand where you're like, number one, be prepared, be prepared, be prepared. If you're not, research. If you can't research yourself, find someone to help you, pull in a colleague, find a better way to do it. You know, expedite whatever you're doing day over day and focus on really the core value added parts, the things that make you impressive, you important, and try to strip out some of the other elements that maybe you can get support on. And then it's just iterative, right? Like, you find out what works for you, you find out how to research and be a subject matter expertise, and then you just keep doubling down on it.
So starting out, you were in data, and then you got into the corporate world, and then you became an entrepreneur, and then came the broadcasting, or like, I know it's a big question.
I always did a little bit of everything. And I think that's what I always tell like people that are younger, because they're like, one day maybe I can do this. And I'm like, well, you could start doing it now. Like, the second best time to start something is now. The best time was probably like 5 years ago. And I think about that, whether I'm taking a new workout or doing something in business, it's like, try it, you know, spark up your Twitter live or whatever and do like a little segment. I mean, Pat McAfee, he was doing like a YouTube thing in his like, you know, side room, and now he's getting paid $25 million a year by ESPN. Like, we all start somewhere. There's, you know, no problem in doing things over and over again at different levels. So when I was in university, my first business was like healthy baby bottles. And I didn't truly believe I was going to sell baby bottles that I had like sourced from China. And I did all this sort of thing, which was great and great practice. But then when I came to it, I was like, never really going to take it to fruition. But I could screw up. You know, I could like blank on questions, and I could like say things that didn't quite make sense. And it started to become more like pattern recognition than it was like, hey, I have to be perfect every time.
Wow. Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question
completely.
No, it did.
But it's super interesting. It's really interesting because being authentic is easier said than done. And I think kind of the success you've had in multiple places just goes to show that the authenticity and the step and repeat and kind of the closed doors and going which way they take you, even if they're baby bottles, is, it's fascinating. I read online that you mentioned that 13 years ago there was no data in hockey.
Right.
How did you identify that? And then how did you start building that bridge?
Yeah, I mean, very little. It was sort of the box score that always was collected for, the past 100 years. And I was a baseball pitcher. I was a basketball player. So I noticed that, like, hey, I could, like, track all sorts of things about pitching or about my basketball performance. But then when we looked into hockey, my brother was, like, training and playing at that time. There wasn't a lot. So he was, like, doing very manual work. We were thinking, okay, there's got to be a better way than, 10 hours to collect data on one player. Let's figure out some software tools. And that was sort of the start of it. It was like kind of what I said at the other panel, looking where there's those gaps, looking how to solve those problems and add that value. I think, the number one thing they teach you with entrepreneurship is like it's very morbid, but find a bleeding neck wound. Like if someone's like, oh my gosh, this is killing me. This department's killing me. This project is killing me. And you think, how can I solve that for that person? And how scalable is that? So for me, it was like, okay, well, we can do this for a player. Well, why can't we do it for a team? Why can't we do it for a league? Why wouldn't media want this? And, you sort of formulate what that business model looks like. And I think anyone can be an entrepreneur. It's just a risk preference and an ability to say, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I will do it. And figuring out the how you will is sort of like where the sweet spot comes in. And being aggressive with it too. Like Canadians are largely way too nice. Like I travel the world, I see all sorts of entrepreneurs. We're super nice. Like we never self-promote. I mean, there's women here, the women on the other panels, I'm amazed with. But you don't hear as much about it, right? Like our media just doesn't cover like entrepreneurs or women that are kicking down doors as much. We don't typically amplify things we do well as Canadians. So that's something for all of you in the room too. If you've done something amazing, like tell people, like I want to know about your cool projects. I want to know about your dreams. I want to know like where you think you could fit, whether that's with my company. Because like I get a lot of emails from men telling me it's their dream to work in hockey analytics. I don't get a lot of women, but I know that they're out there and I see them at all these type of events. So be more self-promoting, be more interested in making sure that you take control of your destiny. You just don't let, your company or whatever mindset you have that blocks you from getting out there and doing what you really want to do.
So when you began Stathletes, like what was the goal then, and is it still what's happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to change hockey, and I think we did that. But I think anytime you have that goal, you always just want to keep kicking down doors. So I think you're always thinking of that mindset of how do you scale things? How do you do things efficiently? We actually didn't raise any capital, which is very strange for tech companies. Usually, number one, you go out and you get money. The harsh reality is 2% of venture capital money goes to women. And it actually has decreased since the pandemic. We're under 2%. So when people ask me like, oh, why aren't you bigger or why, X, Y, Z, it's like, because I'm a woman, I guess, like data driven, that would be, the reason. So, to shift that, we have to keep being successful, keep trying to find ways to invest money in women. I heard, the other woman on a couple panels before saying seeking out and try to hire and mentor, bringing more people, not just in the pipeline, but up the pipeline, and women have to lead too. We have to be the end, yes. It's not like, hey, I'm gonna help and support you, but like I'm always gonna be the boss. You have to see more women in leadership for anything to shift.
So you're obviously walking that walk and you're making that change on the data and the tech side of things. But when did the broadcast part come to play?
Well, that's a great question. Well, so I was selling to media for a long time and with very like lukewarm reception. And then I started to just say, I'm just going to show you what I think this segment should be or how we could use this. And then they were like, why don't you just do it? And I was like, no, I don't want to be in media. That's not what I'm good at. And they're like, well, if you do it, then we can scale it and figure it out. And it just sort of spiraled from there. So a lot of women that I, talk to that maybe are in certain areas that are outside of the traditional broadcasting or journalism realm, it's like, there's so many ways to be more involved, whether it's social media, digital. You see like all of the like influencer stuff now where people are highly paid. And if you're living a life that's like interesting. Two, I think there's really big spaces for people to tell compelling stories. So I do try to use my social media to be like, hey, it's not just all like glitz and glamour. Like, I'm taking a 20-hour flight on next Saturday that I'm dreading, or I'm, doing certain things that, leaving my kids for a couple weeks because I have to like, do these checklists for my business. Like, there's all sorts of drawbacks and trade-offs that I think you don't see behind the scenes, especially like being a woman in sport. So I think, there's just so much you can gain from being out there, being a bit more present, building that brand, building an authenticity component of like, hey, I'm, giving you interesting information week over week, and it's well researched, and you'll at least learn. Maybe I'm not the most entertaining person, I know that, but for all the nerds out there, because there's a lot of them, there's stuff for everyone, right? You just don't have to like model yourself after someone you see. You can just be the best version of yourself.
Wow. I want to play a little game with you called The Biggest, where we're going to dig into some of the biggest moments of your career thus far. It's one of those games that could turn into an hour conversation, but we're going to do it in way less time than that. So let's start with the biggest personal win that you've had career-wise.
Ooh. You know what? I would say there's not one. It's just like incremental gain. I think it was Lindsay or someone at the panel before talking about consistency. I think it's just being a tiny bit better every day. That's my biggest wins for me, because some days you wake up and you don't want to be better. And those are the hard days. Those are when you make up ground on other people.
Or the moments when you've done something that you haven't been able to do properly,
Sure,
or
absolutely.
something that you gave up on that totally, definitely. What has been the biggest loss or challenge that you've faced, and how did you get over it?
It's a good one. I mean, we've had like twists and turns and downward swings for sure in our company, and just in my career, things that I thought would be a slam dunk that weren't well received. And I think getting over it is just realizing that no is just a redirection, and that like I experience, people always ask me, what was your biggest failure? And I'm like, I fail every day because I love to sell, I love to pitch. It's like fun for me. I just want to see who bites. So you start getting really comfortable with failure. Like when someone tells you no, it's like, yeah, okay, whatever, and it's like, it's in good faith. You're being a good person. It's not personal, especially on the business side, right? A lot of times it's just they don't have the time or they don't have the money. It's nothing about you. So I think just like embracing failure and being like actually present with it, and like think, after you fail for about like 30 days straight, you can be an entrepreneur. No problem.
Getting comfortable with that definitely is a help. What was the biggest surprise for you so far?
I think having kids was a big surprise, because I always thought it would be super hard, demanding, and would take a lot away from my business and what I did as a career. And I found it really refocused my energy. And, I've had a lot of women approach me being like, I didn't think I could have like kids and keep going the way I am. And I mean, my feedback to them is, you find a way. And I feel like if you want something done, give it to a busy mom. Like, it's incredible what busy moms can do. So like, don't let anything stop you in terms of like running your road. And, I see this like worship of the grind too, that I don't think is like really relevant. I think like life's a marathon, and you can sprint at times, but like go easy with yourself. Like anyone who's like, yeah, I grind all the time. Like, do they? I don't know. Like, I think you'd be better off like getting more energy and then really doing well on one thing.
What's been your biggest lesson?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think what I said before about like, just time in the market, I think you don't realize how much you pick up as a human. And when you talk to a lot of VCs that have made like tons of money, the billionaires, they always talk about pattern recognition. And I never really understood that, because I'm like, you're a contrarian investor. How are you recognizing patterns? But they see certain things over and over again. And I started to understand that more from like an HR perspective, because I would interview a lot of people, and I would sit in on interviews just to see like, what are the good hires? Are they the ones we rated high? How are we like approaching this? And you realize you see certain things in people that project out to be very valuable, like the growth mindset, right? You're not trying to limit other people. You're trying to bring up other people. You're curious. You're engaged. You are very smart. I think smart people can figure out anything you give them. So giving people chances where maybe they don't have 100% of the background you want, but you can put them on something that they can be very good at. So I think that like pattern recognition element and just whatever that is you need to get to that level, studying that, talking to other people, also like recognizing yourself. I feel like a lot of times, especially women, like we get in our own way, whether it's we overemphasize what we're good at or we underemphasize things that we actually could grow into. It's like, just get out of your way, do it. You're fine. No one's looking at you. I mean, I just did an hour talk in a finance group, and I realized like probably no one was really listening. I mean, they're finance guys, so. But it's like things like that where you realize like you think the spotlight's on you, but in general, people are running their own race. They're largely focused on their own world. So stripping down that like inhibitions that we have, especially as women in business, women in sports, where in many cases we're like the only woman in the room, and just embracing that fact. It's gonna happen, may not happen forever, and hopefully if you keep being successful, it won't happen forever because people will recognize, hey, women can do not only as good of a job, but we have different skill sets that allow us to thrive in many different ways, even better than men.
Well, and I think your note on time spent is a really undervalued element because we've been talking all day. It's like, what can you do extra? What's the best practice here? How do you get here? And the truth is, it's like we mentioned earlier again, it's one of those intangibles that before you know it, you'll be 2 years into your career, 3 or 4, and it may not have been the way you expected it to, but you'll soon reach those 10,000 hours. And there's something to be said for the 10,000 hours. And you just mentioned a bunch of things in your last answer that you would never have kind of had to deal with or gotten the chance to understand if you hadn't stuck around. And showing up. That's all that is, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's even more simple than we make it out to be sometimes. So I loved that answer. Do you ever compare your career to other people's?
No. And I feel like that's like the best mindset too, is like not, comparison is a thief of joy. And looking at other people like their life is better than yours, I think just creates a lot of resentment. And I see that in a lot of companies because I have sort of an insight into, hundreds of companies, how their culture is, how people interact, who gets ahead and why. And I feel like, life in a lot of those companies could be way better if they allowed people to blossom at different rates, do different things, stretch themselves. So for me, I look at some of my colleagues and some have done incredibly well from university, some, different paths. But I think, you're all on your own race. And I think to be a great entrepreneur, you have to be a healthy, happy individual. Of course, there's people that like run people into ground. And, we see these like WeWork and all these, the Uber documentaries. If you haven't watched the Netflix things, they're very amazing how some of these tech companies are run. But the truly, 100, 200-year companies, family values, doing things the right way, trying to build a culture that people have meaning in, that want to stay, because you need people long term. You need people to keep building for you. And so that thought of like scaling yourself, a lot of people, I feel like they get in a job and they're like, I'm going to be the best, I'm going to be the best media person, or I'm going to be the best this. And, it's not really how you build companies or how you build bigger, better brands. It's hiring people who can help scale whatever special thing you are. So whenever people go, hey, I want to step out of, this corporate role or this and be an entrepreneur, it's like you need to have a mindset shift that you're not the person anymore. You're the leader. You have to stop doing, you have to start leading and figuring out where everyone's running to.
Is that easier said than done?
Oh, it's the hardest thing ever. It's the hardest thing ever. Yeah, because I feel like people are definitely driven by ego, right? And there's like that constant feedback of being the person, especially if you are type A. So like stepping aside and saying like, if this person is better than me, that's a win for everyone. And if they move on, well, they've built equity value in your brand anyways. It's like a win-win. So like always hire the A players, always help them be better. And at worst, you lose them. At best, they make you one of the most amazing groups in the in the world. And you see these like groups that can go up together, whether that's the PayPal mafia or like there's certain groups who have been able to figure out how that cohesion works. It doesn't happen a lot with women. And I'm not sure why, because when I see this group and I see other women, it's like people can mesh well together, but for whatever reason, culturally, especially sometimes in sports, we typically get that, hey, there has to be one woman on this panel. Let's like figure out that one woman. And it's like, why can't there be two? Why can't all the panel be a woman? Like mostly all the panels are men. Like, hey, flip the script, it's 2023. So I think there has to be a mindset shift too of the more the merrier, and let's make us all at that level where we are, Canadian women in sports and we're going to compete on the world stage. We're not just going to compete inward.
So looking forward, I know you mentioned that you are looking for like a broadcasting coach. That's something you're working on. Or sorry,
I have a broadcasting coach.
You mentioned
we meet every other week.
You mentioned you're taking a sales course.
Yes, I'm also
Excuse
taking
me.
a sales course.
There we go. So I'm curious to know more about what you're investing in terms of your own personal growth. To keep Stathletes and all your other endeavors going in the direction they are. Yeah,
and I try to be mindful of that too. So my kind of rule of thumb is like everything in quarters. So taking on maybe one thing a quarter. And making it continuous too. There's no point in just saying, hey, I'm taking one sales course and never employing anything I do. Or, hey, I'm doing media training but never doing media. It's like, you got to feel the pain of sucking. You got to go try to sell and people say no to you over and over again to get that process of like, okay, now I'm going to take what my sales course said. Let's see if this will work. And when it does work, you're like, shoot, they knew, and there's that moment that it's like, hey, you have that change agent. Not a lot of people, and me in particular, you just can't change on the fly, right? You go to university, you learn certain things, and then you kind of move on and you think, okay, now I have to do my career. Where like you need kind of that constant back and forth to be like, how do I sharpen my axe just a little bit more? And like I might not need it now. A good example is I'm taking to sit on like a board of governors or a board of directors. So there's a Canadian, it's called IGP, if anyone's interested. It's like how to be on boards. They're looking for a lot of women, so they sponsor people to go into this course. It's mainly old men, I won't lie, but it's fine. I enjoy them. They're all awesome. I learn a lot from them. But that's like largely, I think there's like, 10% of women on board of directors in Canada of public companies. So very aggressively trying to figure out how to get more women on, but there's so much to that, right? There's a cadence. You have to be a lawyer or accountant, or you need to know security, or like I know data, so that's kind of valuable. But you need that training too. So seeking out things where I'm like, hey, I'm sit on one board, but it's not at the level of like a public company. So thinking, okay, how do I get there in the next 10 years? Well, I have to put drops in the bucket now, and I won't see it for another 10 years, but I know it will come because that's just the process of getting there. So seeking what you want, even long term, and like reverse engineering your life and thinking, yeah, it's gonna hurt a little bit right now. I don't wanna take that time away to do that 2-hour call every month, but it will help long term.
The last question before I'll open the floor up for your questions is, the obvious question would be, what is the key to your success? But I also kind of want to take that a step further for everyone in this room, myself included, in asking you what the key to your success to being a multifaceted professional is. Because I think it's one thing to be successful in one lane, it's one thing to be successful in two, and then it's a whole other realm to be successful in more than that, in a sense of authenticity and in a sense of doing something 100%. So what would you say the key to being a multifaceted professional is?
I don't think there's one key, but I think like not taking yourself that serious. Like I want everyone around me to succeed. I want us all to be happy, to enjoy work, and I want to give back too. So I certainly have people who I look up to as mentors, and I had some that were more formal. And now when I see, a woman that's come to me 2 or 3 times with like similar problems at a level I feel like I can help, I'll talk with her every month and just say, hey, like, how are you doing? How are you handling this? What's coming up in your life? And just try to give her a little bit of advice or a little nudge in ways that I would appreciate going down. So I think that like pay it forward attitude is really helpful. And I would also say that's one thing that tech does really well is like they have these like groups that are called like founders forums, and we go and like complain to people that are like in non-competitive industries about like everything, like our employees, our husbands. It's really awesome because you just like dump things on them, and then we sort of talk about like how we work through that, whether that's like firing someone that you never thought you would, you know, a really key hire, how you're spending, you know, you're running out of money, whatever, like the house is on fire, because that's how kind of it is being an entrepreneur. And then I look at sports and we, you know, think we have to have this stiff upper lip and like everything's great and I love my job and whatever, when really a lot of women face the exact same problems over and over again, whether that's a blocker, whether that's someone took an opportunity you really wanted, or, you know, your boss isn't giving you that time of day that you really think you deserve. So I think just being more connected to like-minded, maybe non-competitive people so you don't feel like it's like that, but like getting that feedback where you not only feel empowered, but you have that like resource. Because I think just having a mentor, it's just a different feeling, but having like resources of like, hey, I'm here with you, I'm battling with you, and we'll get through this together. I think that's like the ultimate in empowerment.
Well, not taking yourself too seriously, I think, is a very humble way of saying being fearless and being vulnerable, which I think is a key theme amongst all your answers. So you've definitely done that, and thank you for sharing your story with us and for giving us those little tidbits into your success. We want to have a question for Meghan.
Hi, my name's Emma. Thank you so much for coming out, and thank you to all the other speakers. You're involved in a lot of different aspects of sport, play a lot of different roles. I'm just wondering, how do you find and maintain a healthy balance and not suffer from burnout?
Yeah, and I think that goes back with like not doing too much. So I do try to like map out how my year looks and where I can pull back and what I can put in, and being very focused about that. So whatever your short-term goals are, saying here's the 3 things I need to kick out of the park, and don't worry about the rest. Like I see a lot of people, like you said, try to do so much. It's like, oh, I'm so busy, I'm stressed, and it's like, are you purposeful or are you just like spinning your wheels? And then, you know, sometimes they miss out on opportunities because they haven't done X, Y, Z that they really needed to get to the next level. So I think focus, reverse engineering those short-term goals / long-term goals, and being very honest with yourself. Like, how are you feeling? I mean, mental health is super important, especially in startups, because you're very alone. And like working out, you know, having the stamina to feel good, to like be able to be mobile, because sometimes you sit a lot. So there's all sorts of elements, I think, that like creates an environment where you can thrive. But I always like to say, like, know when to rest and when to quit. And a lot of times it's you need to rest.
Hi, my name's Alex, and I'm also super thrilled to be here. I wanted to kind of touch on being authentic and being vulnerable, and I feel it now as I'm asking this question. I feel like women who are in the sports and entertainment industry have this immense pressure to always be on, and a lot of the amazing insights and tips we've been given this evening are all like highlighting those qualities of being confident, of believing in yourself, all those things. But I think a really great quality that we also share is being able to be vulnerable. And I feel it in the coaching world where I am. I'm usually the only female. I know when I go there, I have to be on, I have to be perfect, I have to get everything right to be taken seriously. But I'm wondering if you've ever had a moment where you've voluntarily or involuntarily exposed a vulnerability in your workspace, and it's actually kind of benefited you or opened a different door, or I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm a big like Brene Brown fan. So like she does a lot on like power of vulnerability, especially with men. So like getting into like the psychology of, you know, why people act certain ways, or like I would say toxic masculinity, because I would say I you know, have that a lot with colleagues, mostly outwards, but you know, it comes out in different ways, and like having that understanding that like empathy, and we don't always understand where people have come from or what they've gone through, but working together towards commonalities is like incredibly powerful. So I think connecting on the human level, right, whether it's with people's families or like in different ways, I think kind of strips down even some of the frostiest men. and allows you to create different relationships and have that like buy-in and trust. Because I think a lot of vulnerability is trust, right? You have to like feel that what you're giving to someone, they're gonna take care with, whether that's being honest about how you're feeling or burnout. Or I know a lot of people have a hard time talking to their bosses because they're always scared about like what that looks like. Even pregnancy, I mean, I told a few people I was pregnant and they were like, are you not gonna be around? Like, should I talk to you? And I was like, no, I'm fine. You know, like I'll be here, don't worry. And like, I ended up like answering emails when I was like literally delivering my child. And like I did an Instagram like post, and like, I don't know if you're in the Twitterverse, but Darren Rovell, who's like always online, he was like, Megan, are you giving birth? I was like, yes. He's like, you need to log off. And I was like, oh no, he's telling me to log off. This is serious. But that was kind of a check myself moment too, which is good for distraction. Actually, it went quite well. But at the same time, you know, there's that give and take too, where like I learned that, okay, here's certain things I share, and here's things that like are meaningful to me and my family, but maybe not outwardly in business. So knowing when to like, you know, pull back and who you're talking to and what type of relationship you have, like the timing thing too. The longer you are around people, the more, you know, you can develop rapport and build better relationships. And I would say vulnerability is the key to like the best relationships.
All right, I think we're going to wrap things up. Shannon can come and let us know the next steps, but a round of applause for Megan. Thank you so much. I'm sure we could all continue to listen to you, give us insight for the rest of the night, but on to the next. And thank you guys for being such a wonderful audience and having such insightful questions. And I'm looking forward to getting to chat with a lot of you in the next couple hours.